everyone. We are about to get started with our keynote speaker, Natalie. I went ahead and clicked record, so this session will be recorded. And we'll start back in about 60 seconds when people are back from their break. It's been a great day so far, and we're right on schedule. So thank you all so much for being here, and I will turn it over to Natalie.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Shall I just launch right in, Christine?
I think so, 2:45.
Okay. Wow. You guys, wow. On time. Very good. Okay. So, thank you, Christine Cockley, Patty Morrissey, Becky McBoom, and the fabulous team at Moderation Management for not only inviting me to share my story with you, but also for all the great work you do for this community, which I'm getting to know more and more as I participate in some of these things, and I'm so impressed. So let me just do a brief screen share so that you'll know kind of what's going on, our agenda, and then I will dive in. All right, here we go. There's the screen share. All right, can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to first share with you my journey to moderation as a wine writer. Some people call that the definition of irony, but especially when you drink for a living, but I will share what worked for me. And then I'm going to talk about 5 specific ways or tips to moderate your consumption. Just bring my microphone over a little closer. I'm going to talk about briefly marketing wine to women, because there are a lot of hidden messages in there that you might find interesting. And then with whatever time we have left, we'll do a Q&A, and there will be prizes. The book I wrote is Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. The subtitle's kind of brought to you by all the dismal Ds. My publisher said, if you add one more dismal D, we can't market this thing. So no depression, no destitution or whatever. But it is about my journey to getting back to moderation. So I think it is highly relevant for what we're doing today. I've written 2 other books, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, A Wine-Soaked Journey from Grape to Glass, Unquenchable, A Tipsy Quest for the World's Best Bargain Bottles. So you can kind of see there's a theme there. So 3 of you will win signed copies of Wine Witch on Fire. And all you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com to win a copy. If more than 3 of you email me, then I'll pick randomly from those who contacted me. All right, so I'm going to stop the screen share and share with you my journey to moderation. All right. Okay. May I ask you a really personal question? My friend Nina leaned in toward me over the restaurant table, wishing to be discreet. A warm June breeze laden with the scent of lilacs wafted through the open window, and there was a tea light that cast a soft glow on her pale skin. Do you drink more wine when you're sad or stressed? Yes, and yes, I sighed. Do you think you drink too much? Yes, and yes. I didn't have wine last night. Her hazel gray eyes searched mine for some affirmation. I asked her, was that your first night? In years. You should wear a button that says, ask me about last night. Nina smiled sadly, puncturing my favorite emotional armor of the reflexive quip. As a wine writer, I had made a career out of boozy slapstick jokes, my way of deflecting serious topics and real feelings. In one article, I joked that I had enough air miles to fly to Hawaii based on wine purchases alone. My tombstone would read, here lies Natalie MacLean, 37,879,981 air miles. Too bad she expired before they did. So as someone who drinks for a living, I live in what a wine lover would consider paradise. Bottles sit on my desk to the right and left of my computer. They fill the gaps in my bookshelves, and hundreds more line the kitchen counters. 3,000 are under my feet in the basement. and cases of wine arrived daily from wineries. For 14 years, easy access to all that alcohol wasn't a problem until I went through the worst vintage of my life, both personally and professionally. It started with my husband of 20 years suddenly demanding a divorce, and then an online mob of rivals came for my career. And so in response to the depression from the divorce and the anxiety from the online mobbing, I started drinking too much. My personal cocktail hour crept up stealthily to 4 p.m. That first glass of wine numbed the pain of my divorce during the arsenic hour, which is the end of the workday when you're tired and hungry, and you either want to take arsenic or administer it to those around you. And then when I worried about how much I was drinking, I'd have another glass to calm my anxiety. Wine blanketed my thoughts about the future, and it muffled the roar, but not the whimper. When I asked my son a decade later about my drinking, he said he didn't notice the increase. He'd grown up seeing his mother with a wine glass in hand, a maternal prosthesis. There was no difference to him between my work wine and personal wine. And increasingly, that was true for me as well. I still met magazine deadlines, paid the bills, monitored his homework, attended his school events. But wine wrecked my sleep. I'd wake up with a headache and pulsing regret at 3 a.m., the witching hour. So wavering between despair and determination, I had to salvage my self-worth, rebuild my career, and manage my drinking. How did I do it? With lots and lots of therapy that continues to this day. So I did write about this fully in my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. I didn't mean for this to be a self-help book, but that's how readers are responding to the stories and tips on how I moderated my intake without going sober and having to walk away from my career. Just a few months after my divorce, I felt like Alice in Wineland, falling down the tunnel of my loneliness. Every bottle seemed to be labeled "drink me." It dulled my senses and feelings. It zapped my energy and sleep. And I started to wonder, had I become an enabler for Nina and others who read my work? They seemed reassured that they didn't have a problem compared to my consumption. I also wondered if I'd become a collaborator with the wine industry in reassuring women, especially, that drinking wine was our just reward, even after that drinking became toxic. Was my contribution to the world more pleasure or pain? So I started reading addiction memoirs, any ones that I could find, Lit by Mary Carr, Blackout, Remembering the Things I Drank to Forget by Sarah Hepola, and Drinking, a Love Story by Caroline Knapp. Their extreme stories falsely reassured me because they drank so much more than I did. They drank in the morning. They hid bottles of vodka in the baby's diaper bag, for God's sakes. I did none of that. But what really resonated in these memoirs was their desire to be released from anxiety. Looking at the world was exhausting. I've always taken in too much sensory detail, noticed every faint smell, every change in light and sound, and it all came in really bright and loud. But wine turned down my sensory stereo. Alcohol whispered, "Don't worry." My shoulders melted down into safety, and I felt liquid relief spread through my veins. As the novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, "First you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes you." Wine seeped into every crevice, untying my muscles and mercifully slowing my synaptic firing. It was an ecstatic surrender. Wine to me back then was church for the unchurched. Because without the drinker, wine is an unplayed instrument, and together We create the experience. For me also, wine starts with the person. How does this wine make you feel? Writing about wine consumes my whole body the way dance used to do. I was a Highland dancer. So when the dance finishes and the wine consumed, all that's left is memory. And wine involves all of me in a way that food cannot. It touches all of the senses like food, but wine is also a drug that creates new mind states. And that full body buzz of wine, I felt like it sent lightning out under my skin. Mine was the opposite approach from some critics who believe that you shouldn't have feelings about wine. You should be objective. And I really don't think this is possible because wine is such a subjective sensory experience. Objectivity, I think, too, can be used as a shield against vulnerability and connection. Plus, why shouldn't I get emotionally wrapped up in my work? Do you have to be serious to be professional? Does levity have to be the opposite of gravitas when the two together make such a complex blend? And science has shown us that the moment right after we laugh, our attention to a message is highest. But now these little asides and jokes about the effect of alcohol peppered my writing. And beneath all the jokes was the real question: how much is too much? On social media, women often sent me private messages asking if they needed to worry about having a couple of glasses a night, or maybe a little more than that. So traditional guidelines suggest 1 to 2 glasses of wine for women per day, 2 to 3 for men, with a maximum of 10 or 15 per week, respectively. But let's keep in mind, 1 serving is a 5-ounce pour, which can look pretty stingy in those giant fishbowl-sized glasses that you can sometimes get, even in restaurants. And, you know, it's always got me thinking that when you finish drinking, you can also use them for a steam facial. They're so large. This is based on wine, though, being 12% alcohol, not the 15 to 16% that some warmer climate wines, such as Shiraz from the Barossa Valley or Malbec from Argentina, can take on. Also, the alcohol content on the wine label may not be accurate. US and Canadian government guidelines allow producers of wines less than 14% alcohol to indicate a level that's up to 1.5% higher or lower than the actual figure. So a wine labeled 14% may really be 15.5%. And that makes a huge difference. Of course, I read all the reports that promoted the health benefits of wine. These included the reduced risk of heart attack, dementia, and Alzheimer's. And I matched these up as slugfests in my mind against the increased risks of weight gain, drunk driving, liver disease, diabetes, and breast cancer. I've since found very conflicting and weak links between drinking and breast cancer, but I'm not a medical expert, and anything I share with you is not medical advice, but it's something that I'm open to discuss if you like in the Q&A. I even interviewed pro-wine health professionals on my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, including a doctor who told me exactly what I wanted to hear. But my own doctor was blunt. Alcohol increases your risk of breast cancer, period. It's a linear relationship. I tried to get her to admit to some wiggle room, but she wouldn't budge. So I thought about switching doctors. When I started drinking wine, it was for pleasure. Then I started drinking more wine for more pleasure. And just thinking about my first glass of wine made me feel better. And that's not surprising because 10 times more brain receptors are dedicated to wanting pleasure than to actually enjoying it. We are wired for desire, not satisfaction. And that's why more of the pleasure hormone, dopamine, is released at the thought of having a glass of wine than when we're actually drinking it. So that mechanism served us very well in the cave days when we were always hunting for food to survive, but it's not so great when you're polishing off that bottle of rosé. The first bite of food or sip of wine is usually the best. The second is almost as good. And that's the gastronomic law of diminishing returns. You're already adapting to the flavors. They don't light up your brain's dendrites, those branches carrying the signals between neurons, as much as they did on that first taste. We're thirsting, I think, for something much more than relaxation from alcohol. For me, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Too much alcohol takes us out of the moment when we're trying to connect with someone over a glass of wine. I didn't start drinking wine until after graduate school when I had the funds to get fancy. In my book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, I recalled the taste of my first great wine. As I raised the glass to my lips, I stopped. The aroma of the wine rushed out to meet me, and all the smells that I had ever known fell away. I didn't know how to describe it, but I knew how it made me feel. I moistened my lips with the wine and drank it slowly, letting it coat my tongue and slide from one side of my mouth to the other. The wine trickled down my throat and out along 1,000 fault lines through my body, dissolving them. My second glass tasted like a sigh at the end of a long day, a gathering in and a letting go. I felt the fingers of alcoholic warmth relax the muscles at the back of my jaw and curled under my ears. The wine flushed warmth up into my cheeks, down through my shoulders and across my thighs. My mind was calm as a black ocean, and the wine gently stirred the silt of memories on the bottom, helping me recall childhood moments of wordless abandon. I still yearn for that first taste again. I love wine because every vintage celebrates unpredictability. It's like going to the ballet versus watching an edited performance on television. It's that live, in the moment risk that I think is thrilling. You know, a dancer could fall flat on her face or soar weightless in the air. For me, wine is also more of an experience than a thing in the way it directly accesses memories and emotions. I can float from place to place in my mind on the magic carpet of scent. Wine is fleeting. It's not like a painting that'll exist for centuries. This glass of wine in front of me has one chance, one moment. I wrote about how wine made me feel, but did that make me an addict? If you look at the history of those who've suffered from addiction, they often started with anxiety or depression. The drug was a way of alleviating the symptoms. As children, they felt anxiety without an outlet, but most didn't say, hey, I want to get smashed this evening. As adults, though, we can self-medicate. Panic attacks, anxiety, alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, and depression run in my family. I remember only 3 things my mother ever said about my father, whom she divorced when I was a child. He had dead eyes. He had accidentally shot himself while hunting and almost died. And just once, when my behavior had upset her, you're just like your father. That last comment felt the most damning of her criticisms, since I didn't know this stranger who had hurt her so much. I didn't see my father till I was 16. Mom hadn't prevented him from contacting me. He just hadn't bothered. He was an alcoholic. I wouldn't have known you if I'd tripped over you, he said, as we sat in my grandparents' small kitchen in Cape Breton. He was tall and dark-haired, with watery, red-rimmed eyes, blue eyes. At 16, I longed to connect with him, to find some piece of my missing identity, to have one of those TV dads who'd grill a new boyfriend before the date. I didn't know what to say. I felt embarrassed and shy. It didn't matter, though. I didn't see him again till I was 18. And after that, I only received a few phone calls apologizing for missing birthdays. It would be a decade before he got sober, though he was still gambling at the racetrack. Years later, I gave him cash to buy furniture for his apartment, and he lost that on the ponies. Several months after my dinner with Nina, I knew I had to ease off wine, but I couldn't bear the thought of quitting completely. My work depended on it. I didn't want to give up something that gave me so much pleasure. You have an orchid brain, my therapist, Miranda, told me. She had a warm smile that always made her eyes crinkle. A what? It's delicate, hypersensitive. What's the opposite? A dandelion brain, grows everywhere, anywhere, very resilient. I wish I had a cactus brain. Well, that orchid brain makes you a better writer and a lousy socializer. Should I quit drinking? That might be punitive. But if I ask about quitting, doesn't that mean I have a problem? It doesn't have to be all or nothing, Natalie. In my experience, telling someone to quit often doesn't work. It's about reducing harm. Try to coast a little longer on each glass, each sip. Don't drink it like water. Take enough just to wet your tongue or moisten your lips. Think about it like chocolate cake. You take small bites for prolonged pleasure. I want to inhale the whole cake. Years after my dinner with Nina, I'd love to say that I could tie everything up emotionally with a nice little red bow. All better now. However, I still struggle. I'm more confident about managing my wine consumption as I've honed techniques from meditation to mindful drinking, but progress is never linear. Moderation became far easier after I dealt with the depression from my divorce and the anxiety from the online mobbing. And that is my first tip, to deal with the underlying issues first. And let me go back to the slides now. I haven't been looking at the chat, so I hope you're still with me here. All right. There are my slides. Here we go. Okay. All right. Can you see the slides? All good? Yes? Okay. Okay. So I think it's hard to believe that there's still some stigma about getting help in the form of therapy or even medication like antidepressants. I started taking Zoloft during my separation and remain on it. But I just wonder, why is this sometimes viewed as a failure of willpower when we wouldn't tell someone who's broken our leg to just walk it out without a cast? Stop being so lame. So I'm a big fan of cognitive behavioral therapy. That really helped me, and I can't imagine ever stopping it. Let me just organize my multiple screens here. The second tip is what I call backstop that thought. And I think the next biggest challenge, as I mentioned, was making it through the arsenic hour around 5 p.m. when there's a natural dip in serotonin, and that's the hormone that stabilizes our mood and our sense of well-being. I had to convince myself that chemical relaxation wasn't Natalie relaxation. I had to change my thoughts from I need a drink to relax to I'm going to take care of myself in a different way this evening. I'm treating future Nat like if I was choosing not to have wine that night, who will thank me tomorrow. I also felt like I had to rewind to the thought just before the thought that said, I need a glass of wine. Usually that underlying or instigating thought was prompted by worry or anger or despair that I wanted to water down with wine. And when that urge for wine to deal with those issues seized me, I had to ask myself, how am I feeling right now in this moment? And for me, what worked was putting my hand on my chest, literally, to reconnect with myself physically, to stop running back and forth in the attic of my mind and come down, back down into my body and feel my own warm flesh. And it was an essential, game-changing 5-second circuit breaker doing that for me. The other tip, the next one, was to change my energy. Could I find a different way to deal with this anxiety or whatever the issue was? I'm sure you've heard these tips: have a bath, watch a show, take a walk, anything. But I particularly love that Japanese concept of forest bathing, getting outside, getting into whatever type of nature that might be close to you. You may not be near a park or a river, but anything, even grass, something to help. I'm a huge believer also in the positive effect of negative ions that come from any source of running water outdoors. It's said to increase our natural levels of serotonin. For me, reconnecting the vineyards that once brought me joy also helped. You know, I spent so much time writing at the computer, et cetera. I almost lost track of what brought me to this subject in the first place. You know, I used to work in high tech at a supercomputer company that was headquartered in Mountain View, California. It's now the campus of Google. And we used to joke that we were the mole people. We shrank from the light. And it was a pride, moment of pride to say you slept under your desk. But that's why I loved wine so much at the beginning. And now again, I remember, you know, one September evening when I visited a winery in Sonoma, and I remember that sweet smell of grapes and alcohol hung heavy in the air of the barrel room. And then as I walked out into the vineyard, and these slanting amber rays slid over my shoulders, wine, you know, really drew me outside again and got me away from the computer and out of my head. And I felt grounded. And when I returned to the tasting room, I drank the wine to make the sun and soil part of me. And then I wrote about it to metabolize my feelings and to digest its sensuality. Several weeks later, I was sloshing through muddy vineyard roads vineyard rows in Burgundy, France. And the rain was bucketing down on us. And the winemaker said, "Do you want to go inside?" But I wanted to stay out in the fields. And we bent down in several places, picking up handfuls of this rich, thick soil, smelling like the fresh promise of life. And I just wanted to eat it. I think she was looking at me a little weird, like, what is this lady going to do next? All right. So now I'll talk about some tactical tips. Some of the things that worked really well for me were, if I open a full bottle of wine, and I'm going to enjoy it on my own, I pour half of it into a half empty bottle. This does a few things. It makes me very mindful of how much I'm consuming versus where is that level? And it keeps that bottle fresh, the half bottle that I save, for another day. Because oxygen is the enemy of wine, just like it will turn an apple brown, rusts everything, including us. You want to minimize the oxygen exposure to wine. And so I used other tools like this preserve spray, the re-pour cork. It scavenges for oxygen in your wine and takes it all out so that you fret less about wasting good wine. You don't get that mentality of having to clear all the peas off your plate from childhood. Sometimes, you know, I would think, oh, I've opened this really good bottle. It's not going to be good tomorrow. These kind of techniques help you move away from something like that. And then, you know, at restaurants, I also try to practice more mindful drinking, because the server, they're going to top you up. A lot of servers will. You know, the old restaurant adage is patrons will eat you poor and drink you rich. All the margin is in the drinks, and not just the wine and alcohol, but tea, coffee, water, everything. So There are lots of responsible servers and hosts, but there are just as many, it seems, that are really wanting to top you up frequently. So I now wait until I'm finished my wine before I get another glass. And that goes for friends' houses as well. Like if I'm at a dinner party and friends feeling very generous, I have to be more mindful of what's going on there. All right. Tip number 5. Oh, this is another part of the previous tip. There's also a contraption. There's lots of contraptions on the market, but the one that I like the best is called Coravin, Coravin. And you put a needle down through the cork of the wine, and then it extracts however much you want, like say a glass. Restaurants have been using this now, although they have the enigmatic machines as well to do it big scale. But you can use one of these things. So let's say you get a really nice bottle. It's more expensive or whatever, and you just want to have a glass one night and maybe a glass 3 nights from now. It's extracted all the oxygen out of the bottle. So it's another good tip to have. The other thing is to make low and no alcohol wines part of your repertoire. Now, low and no alcohol wines have exploded on the market. In the last, I'd say even just 2 years, the quality has just skyrocketed. The techniques have improved. A lot of winemakers, wineries, traditional wineries are now adding low and no alcohol wines to their repertoire, along with spirits and beers and other producers, because they recognize that the market wants it. And not just those who are going to abstain completely from alcohol. More and more of those of us who enjoy wine are mixing it in with our drinks, like, maybe alternate a glass of wine that has alcohol, one that's low or no. Again, it's all about pacing, just as you've probably heard this tip, alternate a glass of wine with a glass of water to stay hydrated, but also to slow your pace. So you're not slaking your thirst on just alcohol. And on my website, I've reviewed 161 low and no alcohol wines, spirits, beers, cocktails, mixed drinks, and that's the link there. And Christine, or maybe somebody can put it in the chat again if it's not still visible in the chat. So there's lots of options these days, and they're delicious. Every style: red, white, sparkling, rosé, dessert, etc. And they have nothing to do with those wretched cooking wines of 5 years ago that were just denatured. I don't know what they were, but I wouldn't even cook with them. Okay, so a couple bonus tips before I get into marketing wine for women. Just going to do a time check. Good. Okay. Drink less but better wine. For me, I needed to get away from the high of alcohol, to get away from the anesthetic and back to the aesthetic, appreciating the sensuality. What first brought me to wine, I didn't start drinking any type of alcohol till I was in my late 20s. That's because I came from a Scottish family where it was all beer and whiskey. It was just way too bitter for me. Turns out I'm a super taster, which just means I'm very sensitive to everything, not just taste. But wine, now that was something I could do. So I had to get back to that. And another technique I used was to drink less but better. To get maybe instead of two $15 bottles of wine, one $30, and then you've got the contraptions to help preserve it, that sort of thing. And often too, when you're buying something more expensive, you're buying something that it's not a linear relationship between cost and quality, but there is a relationship. And you're often supporting a smaller, more artisanal producer of wine, a family farm perhaps, versus, wines under $10, $12 these days. They're pretty much mass market, made like fast food is on a big scale. So yeah, that's I think something that can really help. Of course, drink slower, moisten your lips, whatever works, whatever technique can help. The other thing that really helped me was to plan ahead. So it used to be before I went out to a restaurant, I knew, being a shy person, an introvert by nature, that I would feel some level of anxiety going even to a restaurant. Even though I enjoyed the experience, I was like just a little on edge. So I engaged with what I call pre-drinking, but let's be honest, it was drinking. So I would have one glass of wine before we went to the restaurant, and to take the edge off, right? So, I had to deal with that through therapy to not do that anymore. My partner at the time was just so good. He said, "Listen, uh, when you have that one drink, you're one drink ahead of me or the rest of us, and we're not on the same plane." He said, "Let me share the experience with you." So I wanted him to have a pre-drink, but he said, "Let's just go and enjoy the restaurant." So I had to get rid of the pre-drinking. The opposite is having a pre-game plan. So whether I'm here, at home, having dinner at a friend's house, or at a restaurant, I want to mentally, while I have the most willpower, which is before I start drinking, to have the game plan that says, tonight, I'm going to have 2 glasses of wine, or 3. That's my max, by the way. People ask me this because I'm a wine writer. How much do you drink now? I have 4 nights where I don't drink, 3 nights where I do, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, and they're all around meals. And I aim for 2 glasses, maximum 3. Anyway, that's a side note, but I know it does come up. I get asked it a lot. So the pre-drinking or the pre-game plan is that I decide I'm going to have 2 glasses or 3 glasses, and then I'm going to switch to a chamomile tea or decaffeinated tea. And so sometimes that means as the server is maybe pouring my second glass or my third glass, I'm going to order the tea, because there's that habit of wanting something. Again, it's a nervous twitch reaction or whatever, but I'm working with the tools I have and my own personality and habits, and it works for me. Same at home. I've got the tea on, as I see before I finish the wine and go looking for more, because anyway, so it works for me. It may be something that will work for you. All right, so let me talk about marketing wine to women. And that's the only slide I have for that. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and just go back to just chatting. All right. So the message on some wine bottles is that women, we belong in one of 2 categories. We're either vixens, drawn to brands like Little Black Dress and Kiss Me, with their labels featuring short dresses, high heels, and red lips, or we're exhausted mothers buying wines like Mommy Juice, Mommy's Time Out, to alleviate the stress of motherhood. If we're not babes, we're battle axes, reaching for wine labels like Mad Housewife with taglines like "Award thyself," "The dishes can wait," and "Dinner be damned." Antiquated societal beliefs about women have been turned into slogans and marketing campaigns. And should we be laughing or raging at these jokes that demean women? The marketing message is that women need to have a reason to drink, whether it's girls' night out, a fancy occasion, or just getting through another day of exhaustion. It's also implied that we need permission to drink, as we do when we buy things. There's even a wine for sneaky shopping called White Lie, with little lines stamped on the corks like, "This old thing? I got it on sale." We're wallets, not women. We drink the cutesy, crappy wines that subsidize the good stuff men drink. And of course, I'm generalizing grossly here. Wine was and is the culturally accepted modern day Valium for women who are stressed out with our bodies, our faces, our spouses, our kids, careers, and housework. And it's all over Instagram. Vino is the ultimate soft filter to blunt all the feels. Don't have time for meditation and yoga? Calm your central nervous system with this Cabernet. Wineries now offer Vino Vinyasa yoga classes, detox, then retox. I had internalized all these, the companion social media slogans, things like mommy drinks because you cry. Wine is to women what duct tape is to men. It fixes everything. Well, actually, it's only mansplaining if it comes from the mansplain region of France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling misogyny. Wine is positioned as the less candied and more sophisticated drink than the cosmopolitans that were featured in Sex in the City. You can cloak your overindulgence with the connoisseurship of artisanal, dry-farmed, old vine, natural wines in a way that you could never do with that third Cosmo. Some of my favorite television shows like Scandal, The Good Wife, Dead to Me, Cougar Town, showcased professional women who rewarded themselves with a glass of wine or 3. And their oversized stemware reminded me of the Virginia Slims cigarette ads from the 1960s, positioning them as torches of freedom for liberated women. Conversely, wine is marketed to men as sophisticated and artisanal. No one asks a man why he wants a drink. He has one because he wants one. According to the ridiculous stereotype, Bordeaux bottles, wine bottles with their squat, square shoulders remind French winemakers of their stout wives, while the slender sloped Burgundy bottles bring to mind their mistresses. Wink, wink. I had always laughed off these narratives, just as I did with my boozy quips about drinking too much. But the jokes started to fall flat. Both the wine labels targeting women and the labels we slap on women ourselves profit from powerlessness. As a newly divorced starter wife, I had been painted onto another worn-out label. Wine labels increasingly target women because we're mostly the ones who plan family meals, the social get-togethers. We also still purchase most things for our households, including 80% of wine. I wasn't a bystander in the labeling game. I was team captain. In magazine articles, I had often described my glass of wine at 5 p.m. as mommy's little helper. And that's how I marketed wine to myself. It was also my way of fitting in with other wine moms. It sounded lighthearted, but it had the bitter edge of resentment. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. No one was helping mommy, so mommy helped herself to a drink, and then another one, and another. Even when no one was asking me to plow through more email at the end of the day, I'd do it as long as I had my first glass of wine for the evening. I created my own reward system for productivity. How does she do it all? With wine. But my sense of thankless depletion was never soothed by a drink. As I said, it dulled the roar, but not the whimper. My own part in these narratives has now become clear to me. But 10 years ago, I couldn't see it because it's hard to read a label from inside of the bottle. We vote with our dollars, so I encourage you to look for labels with authentic stories behind them rather than another pair of stilettos. And that's what I offer in both the book. Oh, back to the slides. Cue the slides. All right. We are almost done here from the official presentation. Let me just switch back here. All right. And so these tips, can you see the slides again? I assume, just hand wave if not, but so I offered these tips that I've gone over with you, plus tips on how to organize your own informal wine tasting if you want to, in the free reader guide to my book. It's called A Bewitching Wine Guide, and you can find out information about it at winewitchonfire.com. You can put that in the chat. That's there, and I'll just show you a couple things. So at first, when I wrote the book, I had wines at the end of each chapter, but we didn't want to send the message, my publisher and I, that, hey, got a divorce or depressed? There's a wine for that. So we kind of separated out the two things and had this wine guide where it goes chapter by chapter, but it's for book clubs, wine groups, but people have been using it like, couples, spouses both read the book and then dig into the questions, because it gets at not just questions about the book, but how do you feel about your own relationship with alcohol? So it gets at a lot of those issues that are in there, but it also gives you wines and really, I think, fun and interesting stories about the bottles that I've suggested. Donna Fugata, it's comes from the Sicilian queen when she was fleeing from some usurpers out into the Sicilian countryside, and where she went, there's now a winery. But I loved it. Donna Fugata, woman in flight, in fugitive woman, and Sul Volcano, she was on top of a volcano, woman on a hot seat. So I thought that is just perfect for this book. But again, there are other tips and so on that are throughout this guide, which is free. As I mentioned, I review a lot of non-alcoholic wines, low and no, and that is at nataliemaclean.com/low no. And I would love to give away 3 copies of this book. So it's 3 signed copies. I will mail them to you. If you want to email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. And that is it for me. How are we doing on time? We're good. So we have time for Q&A, I believe. I'm going to stop screen sharing and staring off into the void of my camera and reconnect with you here. All right. Still there? Anybody?
We are. Thank you so much. That was really great.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Fantastic. And I'm sure everybody, you're going to be besieged by emails.
And
Not going to know what to
people
do.
can feel free to email me if you want wine recommendations, or if there's a question you don't want to ask right now and you want to ask it offline, feel free. But I'm happy to take questions now too.
We do have one question in the chat, Patty, if I can.
No, you take over.
I just want to pass this one along. So somebody chatted or in the QA put that they would love to hear more about what you have learned about breast cancer.
That's always a hot topic. And so I'll just preface it, of course, not a medical expert and so on, but I do a lot of reading and research for my own writing, but also for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. And I'm going to be interviewing another expert soon. He was the lead BBC health reporter in the UK. And I was in on a presentation that he delivered recently. And he said that the relationship between breast cancer is really weak. So, we have to be consumers for our own health, right? You have to keep up with the studies and so on. I like to default to the studies that preserve my way of life. But he reviewed 3,000 studies and said that the link is very weak. And when you're looking at all these studies, you have to keep in mind some of the statistics sound scary, but they're talking, you have to think or look at whether they're talking about relative risk or absolute risk. So let's say, I'm just going to make up some numbers right now. Women have a 10% risk of having breast cancer, and that drinking more than 3 glasses of wine a day is going to increase that risk by 20%. It's 20% of 10%, not 20% absolutely. So there's a difference between, I don't know if math was not my forte, if I've just confused everybody, but 20% of one, anyway. But there's a difference between absolute and real risk, or absolute and relative risk. I'm going to stop on that right now. But so just look at the statistics carefully about what they're telling you, because the headlines, they're going to go for the scariest headlines and the biggest number, but sometimes that's not actually what's being discovered. The other thing that he talked about, his name is Tony Edwards. You can Google him if you like. He's got a book, The Really Good News About Wine, 2023, so it's relatively recent. And there's so many conflicting agendas, not just when it comes to research, but what guidelines were given as to what is moderation. And it's really complex to communicate to a lot of people that there's a J curve when it comes to alcohol consumption. So it is not linear, if you have your x-axis and your y-axis, boy, I really need PowerPoint now, but I don't have it. So it's not one-to-one, like one drink, 10% risk you're going to die, two drink, so on. It's a J curve that starts with health benefits. And then as you go over moderation, past moderation, that's when the dangers kick in. And he said, but that's really complex and hard to communicate, and some health authorities and researchers don't want to even go there with the J curve. So they just say, no alcohol is safe. There's no benefits, nothing. But there is a statistically proven J curve with benefits in moderation. And it's not just the old resveratrol studies that came out in 60 Minutes, popularized them back in the, 80s or 90s. There's new studies that are showing these health benefits in addition to socializing. Stress is the #1 killer for most people. I mean, we've got to look at the whole picture. Wine is part of our customs for many people. It's part of the way we socialize. It's part of stress reduction in moderation. But all that gets thrown out with no amount is safe. And he just goes on, and he really digs into the statistics. A presentation from him is really worth having or watching, but I'm going to have him on my podcast. So, and I can share that with Christine or Becky and Andrea and let you know when that comes out, because I think that might be of interest to you. I've interviewed a doctor previously who had some interesting insights to share, but this guy, I think, will be go 5 steps deeper on all of that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. That interesting. I can foresee a whole session that could be had on the medical benefits versus negative impacts of wine, and so much conflicting information out there.
Yes.
And it's that's a huge topic. But thank you for encapsulating it for us and giving us some other resources to refer to as we try to unravel some of that ourselves. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one more point. In Canada, we have the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse, and that is has its roots in the Temperance Prohibition Society. That's where it came from. And there they advocate complete abstinence. They have an agenda. Well, most of us do, right? But but people got confused in Canada thinking it was Health Canada, the federal government, that came out with new guidelines. Health Canada, despite what this group has published and made everyone think was Health Canada's changed guidelines, has not aligned with them. Their guidelines remain the same as 2011 because there hasn't been new primary research. Some of these folks are like, when they said no alcohol from the Canadian Substance Abuse Center, they looked at, I forget how many, but it was thousands of studies and used 6 that aligned with where they wanted to go with their message and just ignored the rest that had health benefits or indecisive, not causal, all kinds of things. So you got to check your sources, what type of risks they're talking about, and all of that. I find it endlessly interesting, but it can be confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. And important clarification. Boy, I'm in Canada as well, and incredible backlash on that that news that was released a year ago. So thank you for that.
Sure.
We have another question that says, you said you only drink wine 3 days a week. Do you have cravings on the other 4 days? If so, what do you do to overcome the cravings?
Yeah, great question. So my progress was, as I said, not linear. It was backwards and forwards and regression and then forwards. So it took me a long time to get to where I am now. The events that I'm talking about in this book happened 10 years ago, by the way. So, lots of therapy and so on since then, but I'm at a place now where that's what I can do without a lot of irritation on those nights off. But when I was still in the middle of it and trying to get there, it was baby steps. You know, I think, Andrea, you were saying just before I jumped on, you know, delaying that first drink by an hour, small steps. And, you know, look, with any large project, and this is a big one, you know, this is life-changing. Small steps, really small steps. So find the small step that's good for you. So when you know, would I have, yes, I would have cravings. And so, you know, things like delaying the drink longer, going from, like, I started with one night and it wasn't a night of no wine. It was maybe a night of or even 3 glasses, not 4 or more. And then it was, you know, 2 glasses, and then, you know, ease. Let's see if we can do 2 nights. And to reduce the cravings, I tried to find other treats. I do have a weakness for chocolate covered almonds, so I had a lot of those. That's not so good either for you, weight gain and so on, but I got myself off chocolate covered almonds. That required more of an intervention, I think, than the wine. But, you know, I'd find other treats. Like, you know, I'd save my favorite shows as a reward for myself. The way I do for working out, it's like I save certain things. No, you can't watch this unless you're working out or you're not having that glass of wine. So anything. At first, the treats and the diversions were not the best, but it got me away from over drinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great, great strategies. And yeah, we always say, don't try to swallow the elephant whole, right? Break it down into manageable pieces and do something that works for you. So thank you for sharing your strategies. Ty,
There's one more thing, sorry.
yeah,
If you're still in the middle of it, which most of us are to some degree, we're all somewhere on that sort of spectrum, it gets easier. It's like a kid growing up or something. You know, at first it's like you're up every hour and a half, changing diapers, whatever. This is the same thing. It is so hard at first, but it gets easier. And I think maybe everybody's different, but I do think we develop, I don't know if it's neural pathways or just it's the habit or it's the willpower, but it gets stronger and stronger, but very slowly.
absolutely. Thank you. Last question, I'm just looking at time. In your own journey, finding a sweet spot for moderate intake, is there a varietal that has spoken to you in particular, and perhaps why?
Oh yeah, well, I start my book off with as a wine label. I call it, let me see if I can get to here. You're not going to be able to see this very well, but it's a Domaine MacLean, and it's Pinot Noir, which is known as the heartbreak grape. This is just perfect for someone who's a collapsed Catholic, who loves suffering. But Pinot Noir can be exquisite. It's a red wine, a light-bodied red wine that has all the flavor and complexity of red wine, but not the heavy alcohol usually, or the oak. It thrives in cool climates, and it's got this sort of nervy, edgy acidity to it, which is actually very tasty. You know, acid in wine is as salt is to food. It brings forward flavor. But I love Pinot Noir because it reminds me as a grape of a person who's kind of on the edge of a nervous breakdown. You just don't know if they're just gonna like, eh. And at a party, I would always go talk to Pinot Noir, not Cabernet, which is solid and steady and boring. I love Pinot. It is a sensualist's wine. I can have 2 glasses of Pinot easily. The alcohol is usually lower, and I'm not asleep on the sofa at 7 p.m. But yeah, that is a marvelous wine. Many regions make it, including Canada and the US.
Mhm. Wonderful. And I love your idea of drinking lower volume but higher quality. So
Yeah,
that
really savoring it and
kind of
seeing.
goes hand in hand as well, and making sure that you're enjoying the wine for the sake of the wine.
Exactly. It's like when we go to a fine dining restaurant, you know, you don't want to just woof it back like you might with KD.
Mhm.
You want to enjoy it. It's like, wow, there's so much here, so much going on. Like, let me slow down and savor it.
Right, right, for sure. Thank you so much, Natalie. I don't have any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else? Somebody has just chatted in great presentation. Thank you. And yes, thank you so much, Natalie, for giving us our first keynote presentation of our very first moderation mindset virtual summit. So thank you so much for being here. Does anyone else have any other questions for Natalie? Maybe our panelist admins here. Anything else come to mind?
Well, I gotta say that we've talked about it twice. It needs to be repeated again. You drink the good stuff. I always say I love alcohol, and I do. I love to drink. I so love it. I love all the different taste, all this other stuff. And for me, when you buy a bottle of lesser wine or whatever it is, I think that's alcohol abuse, kind of like shots. That's all, you're abusing the alcohol because you can have the good stuff, right? The
Absolutely.
good stuff is beautiful and it's wonderful and it makes life worth living.
It is. It's one of our sensual pleasures. I used to get feeling guilty because I wasn't, a missionary somewhere helping people. I mean, I'm helping the helpless rich find a better vintage, but we work so hard. Life's hard. And wine and food and companionship are one of the few pleasures that we can have. And I think it's worth preserving. And it's one of the rewards of life, in a good way.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll just tell you really quickly, 2 weeks ago in the Gold Country in California, we went to a winery called, and I believe it's called Story Winery,
Okay.
and it's Georgians, Russians from Georgia.
Oh,
They
wow.
came over here a generation or so ago, and so they're using the grapes that they had back there.
Yeah.
And just to sit there and to taste this really kind of different grape, but it's a small winery and they've got their heart and soul into it.
Yes.
It just makes all the difference to go there, taste it, and to buy those wines.
And then you have a story to share, because to me, every bottle, there should be a story that goes with it. More and more restaurants are putting, the farmers who, provided the mushrooms and whatever. I think we want to know what we're putting inside of us, where it comes from. And part of that is, what was the family or the backstory or whatever. It's just so much more enriching than, stilettos and red lips.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was very inspiring and very entertaining. And thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it immensely.
Great. I believe we're moving in.